Um, you reached out and said you were really fascinated by how ideas can shape people's lives.
Yeah.
And we found this text conversation that asks this really compelling question. Can an idea take over a person's life? And they use all these examples from like ancient Rome to Elon Musk's mission to Mars.
Mm.
It gets pretty wild. And then they go on to explore whether lies themselves can also be viewed as powerful ideas.
Yeah, that's a really interesting and timely topic, especially these days with so much misinformation floating around.
Right. So this conversation kind of starts off by looking at how an idea can become like this motivating force,
Yeah.
drives people's actions and can even lead them to make incredible sacrifices.
Yeah.
They use the Roman Empire as an example,
Yeah.
like the pursuit of glory in ancient Rome.
Mm-hmm.
Think about it. Thousands and thousands of people dedicated their lives to this idea of Roman glory, even gave their lives for it.
It's amazing how powerful the idea of a greater good can be. It can inspire people to incredible acts of selflessness, courage, even build empires.
Yep.
But it's important to remember that that same idea, if it's not examined critically, can be used to justify really harmful actions.
Ooh, that's a good point.
It's like fire. It can warm your house or it can burn it down.
Right.
Yeah.
And then they bring up this other example of Elon Musk and his whole mission to colonize Mars.
Uh-huh.
It's like this idea is completely consuming him, shaping every decision he makes. It makes you wonder if he's the one who's fully bought into the idea or if the idea is kind of taken over him in a way.
It's really interesting to think about how an idea can almost take on a life of its own. Like it becomes this driving force that can push people to these extraordinary lengths and even shape, the course of history or technological advancement.
Absolutely. So then the conversation goes in this direction that I hadn't even thought about before. They ask, can lies also be seen as ideas that shape people's lives?
Right.
At first I was like, huh. But the more I thought about it, the more it kind of made sense.
Yeah, we tend to think of ideas as being connected to progress and positive change. But what about when those ideas are false?
Yeah.
That's what this conversation is getting at. It's arguing that even though they're not true lies, can have this incredible power, especially when people believe them.
Mm-hmm.
It's almost like this parasitic relationship.
That's a good way to put it. They use this analogy of big liars and little liars to illustrate how misinformation spreads through society.
Yeah.
It really helped me to visualize like how one falsehood can be told by a big liar
Mm-hmm.
and then be picked up and spread by all these little liars who might not even realize they're spreading a lie.
Exactly. It happens all the time. You see these too good to be true stories or those alarmist headlines that are designed to get a reaction out of people.
Right.
Those are often where these big lies come from. They're crafted to mislead. And if we're not careful, we can easily become those little liars, amplifying those falsehoods without even realizing it.
And they point out that this isn't just a modern phenomenon.
Right.
They talk about the historical use of propaganda and how manipulated information has been used to influence people's actions for centuries.
Mm-hmm.
It's scary to think about how people were manipulated without even knowing it.
It really is. And that's what makes it so dangerous. Think about the tools of propaganda. Controlling the narrative, appealing to emotions, suppressing dissenting voices.
Yeah.
These tactics have been used throughout history to shape public perception and push political agendas. And in today's world with social media and how fast information travels, that potential for manipulation has just exploded. It's like we're constantly being bombarded with information from every direction, which makes it even harder to figure out what's true and what's not.
Absolutely. To really drive this point home about how powerful lies can be as ideas, the conversation uses some pretty intense historical examples.
Yeah.
Hitler, Lenin, Stalin, Mao.
Mm-hmm.
It's a sobering reminder of how profoundly these false ideas can shape not just individual lives, but entire societies.
These figures are like textbook examples of how people can exploit those big lies to gain power, control, and inflict unimaginable harm.
Right.
Like take Hitler, for instance. His whole Nazi ideology was built on a foundation of lies about racial superiority, national destiny.
Yeah.
And those lies led to the horrors of the Holocaust. It shows how a carefully constructed web of falsehoods, when it's believed by enough people, can lead to just unspeakable atrocities.
It's terrifying to think about the scale of the destruction caused by these big lies and how people become those little liars, perpetuating the ideology and contributing to the suffering. It makes you wonder, how can we prevent history from repeating itself? How can we be sure we're not being misled in the same way today?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it?
It really does feel like we're living in this age of information overload. Like, how do you even know what to believe anymore? Does this conversation offer any solutions for how we can, like, navigate this world of misinformation without getting sucked in by those big lies?
Well, yeah, thankfully it does. They talk about this concept of living without lying. And at first, it sounds pretty straightforward, right? Just tell the truth.
Mm-hmm.
But it's so much deeper than that. It's about this conscious effort to seek out the truth in all areas of your life.
Yeah.
Being really honest with yourself, questioning your assumptions, and even being willing to admit when you're wrong.
I think that last part is the hardest. Like, I know I've definitely held on to beliefs, even when I knew deep down that I was probably wrong.
Yeah, I think it's natural to want to be right, to have our beliefs validated.
Right.
But living without lying means letting go of that ego a little bit,
Okay.
being open to new information, and accepting that our understanding of the world is always changing.
So how do we actually do that? Like, how do we put this into practice?
Well, they outline some key principles.
Okay.
And the first one is critical thinking.
Right.
So it's not just absorbing information passively, but actively engaging with it.
Yeah.
Question everything.
Oh.
Analyze your sources. Look for any biases, any hidden agendas, any inconsistencies.
Oh, that's a good one.
Yeah, like ask yourself, who benefits if I believe this?
Hmm.
And don't just rely on one source for your information.
Yeah.
Look for different perspectives.
Okay.
Try to find things that challenge your beliefs.
Makes sense.
The more angles you consider, the clearer the picture becomes.
So be a critical thinker, but also be open to being wrong.
Exactly. Another principle is continuous learning.
Okay.
The world is constantly changing, right? New discoveries are made. Our understanding of things evolves. So we can't get stuck in these old ways of thinking.
Yeah.
Be open to new information.
Right.
And be willing to adjust your understanding when you need to.
It's like the only constant is change. Right?
That's a good way to put it. The next principle they talk about is authenticity,
Okay.
which is really about aligning your actions with your values.
Uh-huh.
So you have to understand yourself, your beliefs, what matters most to you, and use that inner compass to navigate all the information out there.
Yeah.
And make choices that are true to who you are.
I like that. It's like having the courage to stand by what you believe in, even when it's hard.
Exactly. And that can be really challenging, especially when we're dealing with these complex issues and so much conflicting information.
Yeah.
That's why they also talk about embracing uncertainty,
Okay.
being okay with not having all the answers.
That's hard, though. Isn't it easier to just cling to certainty? Even if you know deep down it might not be totally right.
It is, but clinging to certainty can actually blind us to the truth. Remember, those big liars often prey on our desire for simple answers and easy solutions.
Right.
So living without lying means getting comfortable with complexity,
Okay.
acknowledging that there are different perspectives on every issue,
Yeah.
and being willing to sit with those nuances.
That's a really important point, especially now when things feel so polarized.
And finally, they talk about empathy,
Okay.
which means stepping outside of your own little bubble and trying to understand other people's experiences and perspectives, even when they're different from your own world.
So listening with an open mind.
Yeah, and trying to see the world through someone else's eyes.
I can see how that ties into this living without lying thing.
Right. It helps us challenge our own biases and assumptions. And it gets us out of those echo chambers where the same ideas just keep bouncing around.
Yeah.
It exposes us to new ways of thinking and helps us build bridges across those differences.
Wow. This whole concept of living without lying is really making me think.
It's definitely a challenge.
Yeah.
But it's so powerful.
It seems like this whole living without lying thing, it's not just good for us as individuals, but it could actually benefit like society as a whole.
Yeah, absolutely. It's not just about personal growth,
Yeah.
It's about creating a world where truth and honesty are at the forefront.
Like imagine a world where everyone's encouraged to think critically, to be open to different perspectives, and where people are more interested in understanding than in just being right.
Right.
It's kind of a utopian idea. But I can see how those principles, if they were really embraced, could lead to less conflict, better decisions, more understanding. Are there any like real world examples of this living without lying in action, like where it's actually working?
Well, think about the scientific community.
Okay.
Science is all about the pursuit of truth,
Right.
right? Scientists are constantly questioning, testing, revising their theories based on new evidence.
Right.
It's this ongoing process of trying to get closer and closer to the truth.
And it requires a lot of transparency, open debate.
Exactly. Yeah. And that collaborative spirit is really important for living without lying on a larger scale, too.
Right, like working together.
Yeah, we have to be willing to listen to each other.
Yeah.
To engage in these respectful dialogues and recognize that we all have things to learn from one another.
Like two heads are better than one.
Uh-huh, exactly.
Huh.
The more perspectives we can consider, the closer we'll get to understanding the truth.
So it sounds like this living without lying, it's not like a one-time thing. It's not like you just decide to do it and then you're done.
Right. It's a process.
Yeah.
It's a journey.
Okay.
And this conversation really emphasizes that it's something we have to work towards every single day.
So for our listener who's out there just fascinated by how ideas can shape our lives, what's the one big takeaway you'd want them to walk away with from this whole deep dive?
I think it's this. Be really mindful of the ideas that you allow to take root in your mind.
Okay.
Cultivate a healthy sense of skepticism. Question everything. Don't be afraid to challenge your own beliefs, because sometimes the most dangerous lies are the ones that we tell ourselves.
That's really powerful. And it kind of circles back to that question we started with. Can an idea take over a person's life?
Yeah.
And it seems like the answer is a resounding yes.
Yeah.
But the good news is we have the power to choose which ideas we let in and which ones we reject.
We do. It all comes down to staying informed, being critical, and being true to ourselves.
Well said. Well, that wraps up our deep dive into the power of ideas. And hopefully it was insightful and thought-provoking for our listener.
I hope so. Remember, living in truth is a journey, not a destination. So keep questioning, keep learning, keep striving to live in alignment with your values.
Great advice. Thanks for joining us for another deep dive.